What a horrific story. And you guys have seen on my show before that we've had so many people that have been affected by this, many of these injustices here. And I am eager to know and listen to his story and to meet Tim Hale tonight to find out his what he saw, the horrific story that he has to tell. So, everyone, I am just really excited that my Skyhorse Publishing has introduced me to Tim, and we're going to hear all about that. So, everyone, please welcome this guest. And I know that Rumble's having issues tonight, so please put your comments and say hello and everything to Tim over here on X, and I appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. But let's welcome to the stage Tim Hale.
Thank you so much for having me on. I appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm sure there's a lot to cover, so thank you very much for having me.
You're welcome. You're welcome. I'm so excited. Well, I shouldn't say excited is not the word. And I keep trying to correct myself because who's excited to hear this story? Nobody, right? But I am excited to get to know you for sure. But I mean, yeah, you're not my first J6 prisoner on, and what has happened to you guys is just appalling. And we've heard stories from grandmothers or going through cancer that were invited in and serving 6 month prison sentences to people getting 25 years to life, kind of situation. So it's all over the board with thousands of individuals that were put into these gulags and have received horrific treatment. So the stage is yours, my friend. If you want to tell us a little bit about you, your story, and then also we'll talk more about your mission and how to help as well.
Sure, thank you so much. So, first, for a little background on me, my name is Timothy Hale. I'm from New Jersey, born and raised. I spent 12 years, basically my entire adult life, dedicated to public service. I joined the Army out of high school. I was a naval weapons contractor, so I served in some capacity two different branches of the Department of Defense. I was a labor leader for those contractors. I've had my finger at a lot of different pies. I was also a comedian, a live streamer, a satirist, and so I'm happy to say I'm both serious when it comes to fighting for others, but I'm also a bit of a troll. So I have a big appreciation for dark humor and the arts. So I did about 3 years in total. I'd say 3 years behind bars. I'd say I did about a year to, well, I'd say 2 years roughly inside the, you mentioned the word gulag. That's
Hmm.
about correct. That's appropriate. I was in D.C. I was one of the first defendants picked up after January 6th. I spent some of the longest amount of time in D.C. especially. I was there at the very beginning when it was at its worst, at the height of COVID, when we were locked down in solitary confinement for about a year. At the end of 2022, I was finally sent to prison, the Bureau of Prisons, where I spent about another year. And so, and in a few days, it's going to mark my 1 year anniversary out of prison. So
Wow.
that was December 15th is when I finally got out of the halfway house. So it's been a long journey, but I consider myself one of the lucky guys because, fortunately for me, unfortunately for the others, I only got a 4 year sentence. President Trump signed the First Step Act, and this allowed me to do less time than I normally would have had to do. I only did 3 years on a 4 year sentence because I was able to accrue what they call First Step Act credits. But not everybody is so lucky. And a lot of my friends who I met in jail are still in prison. And hopefully, when Trump gets into office, that story's going to change. Hopefully.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that as well. And I am, that word I will use, very excited because I am from different and previous guests I've had on, people haven't even received even a trial yet. Some are still awaiting that situation, or a great or legal representation, or you're facing the same judge, sometimes even the same juries, and you're just so backlogged that it's something of what a speedy trial doesn't even exist for these people. And the conditions I was told about in Washington too, with like the 1 hour, you're all in solitary confinement, the 1 hour of sunlight, eating, rotten food and terrible conditions. And I mean, it's just horrific to hear what you guys have gone through. And first and foremost, my heart goes out to all of you that face that because, whether you committed a crime or not, the fact that you don't even have the constitutionality of it receiving a trial, receiving your dates, having this backlog or pushback or whatever they want to do to you is just absolutely injustice. And That's horrific. I don't even know what they charged you with, Tim. What did they come up with? And as your issue here with the
So
suspension. Go ahead.
because I got picked up pretty early, most of us get what they call the misdemeanor cocktail, and so the
Okay.
misdemeanor cocktail is usually 2 to 4 misdemeanor charges with a maximum, of course, of 6 months to a year. These things include trespassing, illegal picketing, stupid stuff like that. Some of us very early on, once the administration transitioned from Trump to well, I said Obama, from Trump to Biden, they started hitting us with this felony charge called 18 USC 1512, obstruction of an official proceeding. Now, for those who don't know, quick history lesson: the actual statute originates from the 80s. It had to do with tampering with a witness. After the Enron scandal, where they were just destroying documents, they created a substatute in addition in 2003, and that's where the obstruction of an official proceeding charge comes from. It's a substatute. It's a substatute of a charge that already existed. And so when you think about it, reasonably, if it's not much of a leap to say, okay, we start the statute with tampering with a witness to obstruction of an official proceeding when it comes to tampering with documents. It's like it has to do with tampering with testimony or evidence. It has to do with an evidentiary proceeding. Fair enough. But what he ended up having was that this charge was never used to apply to rioters. This charge was never used to apply to political dissidents. It was about undermining proceedings to investigate evidence. So the idea of obstructing Congress with this charge had never been applied to people who had rioted or to who opposed let's just say, the certification vote. This was the first time they'd ever done this, and that's what they ended up doing. Now, fortunately, my lawyer, Nick Smith, he actually wrote the briefings that would eventually lead to the 1512 charge being tossed out by the Supreme Court. So I'm grateful that, I wish I didn't have to serve my entire sentence before I was finally vindicated, but the Supreme Court finally tossed out this ridiculous charge. But a lot of people were hit with that, and it was completely uncalled for.
Oh my goodness. And right at anything and everything they could. And a lot of times too, I even the word riot. You're protesting, and last time I knew that we could actually protest, and I wasn't there per se or anything like that, but I thought we had the right to protest. I mean, they sure did in the summer of 2020, and that was definitely more riots and burning down cities and property and things like that. And I did not see any of that necessarily happen there. I can't say because I wasn't there, but you definitely had the right to have your voice heard, and this was just absolutely, in my mind, absolutely unheard of. And like you said, even being charged with things that were never even that doesn't even fit the scenario that you guys even faced. So that's crazy. I'm glad you were vindicated here towards the end. It's kind of like receiving a pardon after you've had 25-year sentence that you served.
Right.
To some extent. But speaking of pardons, because I don't know how you feel about this kind of situation. Here you guys are being charged with, all these different misdemeanors. When you see other people like Biden's son that are just getting full on pardons for, a decade, things that he may have done or he may,
Right.
like unbelievable. And again, I'm excited for President Trump to come in and look and say, okay, what in the world's going on? Because we have definitely been talking about this for 4 years, as they call it, an insurrection for people voicing their opinions against something that they don't believe in or
Yeah.
feel that was just. Um, so, if you wanted to go into this, I know that there are certain points that you want to make about that, about like no one's above the law, which is kind of funny,
Right.
or these raids that people have been witnessing stuff. Please continue.
Well, sure. And here's an interesting thing. Um, let's say, another statute is called civil disorder. That goes back to the race riot era. It originates with the Civil Obedience Act. And so you need to understand a lot of these statutes that they charge people with to keep them from rioting. A lot of this had to do with stopping people from protesting for civil rights. These are relics, right? These are anachronistic statutes that were still on the books that they were able to weaponize against political dissidents. Now, I always make this point. I consider myself an independent who supports Trump, right? I'm a pro-union guy. I'm not like far right, despite the fact that they framed us all as that. I see how dangerous it is to weaponize the legal system because the pendulum can always swing back in one direction to the other. Also as a history major, I note things like, the FBI, the feds, law enforcement used to target the left. They used to target the unions. They used to target the civil rights protesters. They used to target the anti-war movement. And so the idea that you create this precedent where you can weaponize the legal system, well, what's stopping us from doing it to them? I don't want to do that,
Right.
but this is what happens. And so, um, I think it's important for people to realize that with our common law system, one bad precedent can last for generations until it's corrected. You look at the Roe v. Wade decision, how many decades before the Dobbs decision?
50 years, right.
Yeah, almost
Mm-hmm.
70 years. When you look at segregation with Plessy v. Ferguson, how many years until Brown versus the Board of Education? Generations. And so, when
Right.
you look at like you mentioned, the raids, there were pre-dawn raids. I mean, I told you I worked as a contractor for the Navy, and so I lived on the Navy. I had base housing. One night, about a week after J6, I was on the ramp off the base so I could go to like Petco to get pet food for my fish, which are all dead, by the way, of course. They pulled me over with dozens of vehicles, SWAT vehicles, all blacked out and stuff, and FBI, NCIS. They rush up to me, guns in my face, and this is the kind of stuff. Again, I was fortunate because it's just me, but you have people whose families have been terrorized. You had flashbangs and
Yes.
grenades and all that go off on people's homes. Um, Weapons pointed. I actually I'm writing for Gateway Pundit now for every now and then to write about J6 stories. I just interviewed a guy named Kaplinger and Jeremiah Kaplinger, and he talked about how they pointed weapons at his wife and kid. And so
Mm-hmm.
this stuff has been going on for years. I think it's kind of mellowed out, as in it doesn't happen as often, but it still does happen. And they're not going to stop. They're still arresting people. So you need to remember
Right.
they're still hunting down people for walking around a building or even on the grass 4 years after the fact. They don't care if Trump is going to pardon people. They don't care if he's going to stop the prosecutions. They want the bodies. And so it's
Right.
important for people to understand they denied people bail, the right to bond, which is a
Mhm.
constitutional right. They denied us access to our evidence. They denied us access to fair and speedy trials. I could go on and on about how
Right.
basically every civil right was violated. And one of the most sacred ones, even though it's not in the Bill of Rights, is something I hinted at earlier. The 14th Amendment provides not just for due process, it provides for equal protection under the law. And so Trump supporters and J6ers have really been turned into this new class of a new criminal class of defendants, and it's completely uncalled for. It's completely unconstitutional, and it was a horrible precedent to set. And this is on top of what we already experienced with COVID. So it's like, how many bad precedents is our legal system going to have to endure? I don't think it can if this keeps happening. So it's got to stop now.
Right. And that's another thing that makes me excited about President Trump to go into these three-letter organizations and be like, what in the world is happening here? What kind, like you said, what kind of presidents are we selling? Because we have two tiers of justice here. And we saw that, like I said, within 2020 with the rioters and from everywhere from, like Michigan to Oregon to wherever, where they were just burning, even here in Virginia, where I'm from, you can just burn down, tear down, whatever, destroy, rob, pillage, whatever, and nothing.
Yeah,
And
they
if you did get arrested, you were bailed out immediately. You faced minimal things, but then yet anybody who was even on that lawn, and there's millions of people there. Everyone, from what I have been told in the videos I have seen, millions of people there. And even if you're on the lawn, you're an insurrectionist, you're a whatever, with this narrative that is, unbelievable. And I've had, like I said, I've had a few others on too, and they're like, if I cause destruction, I'll own that, right? I know I'm not supposed to be, breaking windows, or I should be do that, but we were trying to, it's like, save lives. I had a guest on previously that was trying to save Roland Boylan's life, and the police were like spraying them and shooting rubber bullets at them, and like, what do you expect us to do? We're just trying to get her out of this area, and you're stomping all over us. I mean, but what you guys have faced, like you said, I mean, the list goes on of not even, having the constitutional rights to what is already supposed to be there in a fair and just system.
yeah. I mean, you had mentioned some of the riots prior. There was a BLM riot in D.C. right before January 6th, and the same officers, the Metro PD. Nobody seemed to care about that. And what was it? The Summer of Love, they called it. Out in Portland, they destroyed federal courthouses. This isn't just in some city because they were rioting over some BLM stuff. This was specifically a federal courthouse. They attacked federal properties. Nobody seemed to care. When Code Pink even on there's a discrepancy even between nonviolent offenders, because when you look at Code Pink and how they interrupted the Brett Kavanaugh hearings, that was in a Senate building, right? So that was the Cannon, I think it was the Cannon office. Yeah, I mean, so I mean, we were in the gulag, and this is just humorous to me. We're watching the news inside the DC jail as environmental radicals were assaulting police with bike racks in DC for environmental justice or whatever. They got tickets, and it's like
Right.
there's this. I think like there's really got to be a change when it comes to DC. I think we need to take away a lot of their autonomy, because I think the Home Rule Act, and in my opinion, was frankly an affront to federalism. But the fact that they have DC statutes that all the leftist rioters get charged with, but then it's federal charges for Trump supporters on January 6th. There's a big discrepancy here. This is the law is not being applied fairly or equally across the board. And you had hinted at something at the regarding Roseanne Boylan. There were a lot of good people who were trying to help her.
Yes.
Ashley Babbitt was shot through the neck.
Mm-hmm.
The only people who died at the
Mental health.
Capitol, yeah, the only people who died at the Capitol were protesters. Meanwhile, here's something nobody talks about: the infiltration of the crowds. So you know, where Roseanne Boylan was dying, there were Antifa provocateurs. There was a guy there with a baseball bat assaulting the cops for 3 hours. There was a guy who gave him a baseball bat. He turned out to be a communist. He had confessed to the FBI. There was Josiah Kenyon. He gave the bat to Lang. And then you have where Ashley Babbitt was shot through the neck. The window she went through was broken in by another Antifa member. I met him in jail. His name was Zach Alam. So he's an
Right.
Antifa member. He was changing outfits inside the building. I found him change outfits twice. Once in the staircase where she was shot, and also down in the crypt where they have all those statues. So a lot of weird stuff going on, and those are just leftist provocateurs. We're not even getting into the FBI assets that were undercover. You had Defense Intelligence Agency assets. You had BOP assets deployed there that day. We have reports saying CIA assets were deployed. There were canine units there. Metro PD and Capitol PD all. We have video where they're talking about their assets that are in plain clothes. So the full extent of infiltration, it's like, not for nothing, maybe I'm an idiot, but if I was going to protect the peaceful transfer of democracy, why would I only put 5 cops there to protect the Capitol perimeter before Ray Epps and people like that knock the barriers over,
Right.
so thousands of people like me pour into an area we don't even know is restricted? It doesn't make any
Right.
sense. And,
Right.
I'm sure you've seen the video by now of Nancy Pelosi. It took 3 years, but Nancy Pelosi's on video now saying that she was responsible for January 6th and the security
Right.
failure. And there's Metro
Right.
PD. There's Metro PD body camera footage where the officers, they're like, they should have called us hours ago. They set us up. They set us up. And the cops are like, yeah, they set us up. Absolutely. And it's just like, well, who set them up? The Metro PD answered to Mayor Bowser. The Capitol PD answered to Nancy Pelosi. Trump offered them National Guard support. I think I
Did.
mean, we all know this was a setup. But the question is who. And I'm just hoping when they get in there, they just release these reports they've been holding back, because they know who was involved there that day. They just don't want to give us the names.
Right. And I'll be honest, and what kind of concerns me, and okay, President Trump, I hope you do this too, because it seems like, we know this from past things that, different politicians or leaders or whatever that do these kind of things, and then just nothing ever happens. Like they just have this immunity to actually face consequences. And I don't care who they're married to. I don't care what position they hold. I've always felt this way. If you commit a crime, you should face a consequence. And I'm sorry if they're a congressman. And they have, and that's another thing. I hate that congressmen and people like that have immunity situations. That should never happen. We were talking about pardons before too, and watching and looking through history about different congressmen or governors or whatever being pardoned per se. And I don't know all the details, everyone. I haven't done that big of a deep dive, but I don't think there should be an immunity. If you've committed a crime, you should face some kind of consequence, just like the rest of us. Because if I went out and did that, right, I would have to be just, thrown in jail. I mean, heavens. I mean, people were just being invited in. We've seen videos of these too, being invited on in, security and police are like, come on in. We don't know. And then as other people are rallying this up and stirring the pot, and like you said, Antifa and different things like that, they're making the situation worse, and absolutely is set up because they wanted you guys to do this. They wanted to create this narrative of, look at these people, look at these Trump supporters, look at how crazy they are. And you're like, really? Um, but I hope that Nancy Pelosi does face some justice. We know that President Trump has asked several times. He really wanted to have, the National Guard come in. He wanted the police to be involved, and it was told no several times.
I
And
mean, Trump's not
he
stupid.
completely
Like I went to his inauguration. I've been to DC only a few times. The first time I did, I went with my friend. We went to Trump's inauguration in 2017,
nice.
and I remember going to. We were trying to go see his parade, and we
Hmm.
walked by this. I think it was a Starbucks, and I'm like, man, I could really use coffee. I'm addicted to caffeine. I'm like, but no, I don't want to
Right.
miss the parade. And then a few minutes later, I get an alert on my phone. So people are like, hey, are you all right? I'm like, why? And they send me a live stream of people breaking, I guess, the storefront. And I'm like, holy crap, I was just there. And so, like, nobody cared about the riots at his
No.
inauguration. Talk about the transfer of power, right?
Right.
Nobody cared about that. And actually, you had just mentioned something that just triggered a memory of mine. What about the congressman who pulled a fire alarm inside of Congress to interrupt that vote a couple months ago? It's like that was
Yeah.
interrupting a congressional, that was obstruction of an official proceeding of Congress. Nothing happens with that guy. So
Right.
I do say, having read the Constitution, there is the clause about congressmen aren't supposed to be arrested at least not on the grounds of Congress. I think that has more to do with trying to prevent the abuse of the executive branch against the legislative. Fair enough. But I do think, yeah, I would like to see the bad actors in Congress held accountable for their behavior. Because keep in mind, I believe there are elements within Congress that set January 6th up. But even more than that, they had those phony committee hearings for January
Right.
6th. In
Right.
not for nothing. That was for two purposes. One, to continue pushing the false insurrection narrative, but two, it also helped prejudice juries against a lot of people I was locked up with. The Oath Keepers, the
Mhm.
Proud Boys, there were defendants like Ryan Nichols. There were several defendants that were shown in the videos of the J6 committee. They intentionally did that to sabotage any
Mhm.
chance those people could have a fair trials. And they had, I don't know if you saw it, they had giant, like jumbo screens they were setting up in
Mhm.
DC. Well, they deny us change of venue so we can get an impartial
Right.
jury of our peers. So you not only deny us a change of venue, now you're going to put giant screens up to brainwash the local population more than they are. DC's obviously extremely liberal. What did they vote? Like 90+% for Kamala or for
Right.
Biden last time. So it's just like
Right.
that's called prejudicing a jury. You know,
Hmm.
and this is on top of the crazy insurrection narrative. This is on top of the far right narrative, the Proud Boys, Oath Keepers, blah 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 blah. So I mean, it's just from the very get go, there were elements in Congress trying to deprive us of our civil rights and due process. That is just another layer on top. Yeah, the entrapment scheme of J6, and then also I would say deprivation of rights. I don't know to what extent we can hold them accountable for that, but and then I just keep remembering stuff because there's no shortage of stuff. They deleted all that evidence. I'm sure you saw as
Hmm.
well. They deleted the evidence.
Yeah.
Somehow the Secret Service's text messages can't be found. All this kind of stuff. It's just like, when is it going to stop? They're
Right.
withholding.
Even Liz Cheney. I mean, this is why we all know that Biden's considering giving her a blanket a pardon as well. And she did. She admitted stuff and deleted stuff and whatever. To like you said, taint the waters
Yeah,
and show a certain narrative that they wanted to do. I mean, good grief! Right before this happened, or right during this has happened, they even deleted Trump's Twitter accounts so that people couldn't find out that he was even trying to say, "Hey, you guys, let's be calm, let's leave, let's do whatever." I mean, they really wanted to instigate a certain narrative. And I really hope I don't know. I hope that Biden does not give her the pardon, but there were others. She's not alone in that group of people that were holding this narrative. I should say movie that they were trying to narrate. And like you said, jumbotrons everywhere. Let's taint the waters.
right. Yeah, exactly. They poisoned the well. That's what it was. It was all
Hmm.
sleight of hand. Um, God, it's funny. Like, I would like to think that, let's say that they do pardon them. I hope that at the very least they're. Here's the thing. Like, I don't believe anybody believes in the insurrection narrative, even the lefties. Maybe like 5-10% of the population still does. But even so, I would think that the popular outrage, I would hope, is enough to at least promote some sense of righteous indignation to the point where there's some sort of reform about how members of Congress can conduct themselves and how they engage in these sort of proceedings so that they can't, again, poison the well, something like that. Again, I'm of the opinion that DC not only should it not be a state, but
Hmm.
It should go back to just being a straight up district. The city of DC shouldn't have the autonomy it does. I think Congress should have direct oversight of DC. I think a lot of the discrepancy in prosecution of J6 versus left wing activists or protesters has been a result of this, the competing statutes. And I also think that I also think that the different levels of autonomy have also allowed people to obfuscate who was responsible for January 6th. So it's always finger pointing, he said, she said. Where's like, and so anyway, I'm hoping that maybe a lot of reform can come out of this. The question is it likely? And I'm inclined to say no, it's probably not. I understand the nature of government is corruption. You know, the reality is government is like a wild animal. You got to try to it's not domesticated. You want it to be, but you got to try to make it do some good, knowing its true like its true feral nature. I'm trying to be a realist. I always say I take the world for how it is, not how I want it to be. But it
Hmm.
would be nice if there were some reforms that came out of this. I just there's that old saying, "Who guards the guardians?" You know, and it would be
Yep.
nice if it would be nice if we could trust our representatives to actually represent us. But considering that they failed to release the thousands of hours of video they were supposed to release, my hopes aren't that high. But who knows what'll happen?
Right. Well, and just because, you may be a Republican or whatever does not mean that you're, in sync with some of these others that are fighters that want to change.
Yeah,
And I've seen a lot of different things like, we want 100% change, and we might have to be happy with the fact that we might get 15-20% change.
yeah,
At least it's a start, and starting with the leaders. I mean, I love that, some of these nominees and stuff that Trump has already named that he wants in these positions. That's a huge start, because even if the Congress has an inquiry or whatever, evil, nice or evil letter that they write, a strong worded letter. That's the thing I'm thinking of, right? Where we
right.
have these inquiries. If you don't have a DOJ or an FBI or anything to follow up with charges, nothing's going to ever happen from them, because the Congress cannot actually have these people arrested. So what needs to happen is you need to have them in sync. So if the Congress wants to do an inquiry and have indictments, and you have the DOJ that's able to actually follow through with this, not that we're seeing now, so to see these changes in leadership is a great start. And that might be all that we kind of see, but what a great way to set a path
Yeah,
instead of this corruption and nightmare that we're seeing now. And yes, term limits. I hope, but the problem I have in the chat, they said term limits would help. Yes, it would almost be a huge answer to the problem here, guys. But who has to vote on term limits? You guys know that they have to vote on that themselves, right? I don't know if that can be. You tell me, Tim, maybe but I don't know if that could be something as an executive order. I think it literally has to go through the House,
no,
the Congress, and
yeah,
vote on that
it
themselves, guys. And that's the problem. It should be the public that gets to vote on that, but
Well, it could never be, you're right, it could never be an executive order just by virtue of
right,
how the Constitution is always amended via
right,
legislative process. There is a way, it's called a convention of states. It's a little more
right.
complicated, but there are ways to amend the Constitution without it originating in Congress. The problem is it never happens that way.
Mm-hmm.
And you gotta wonder, is it easier to sabotage it that way, or I really don't know. But I mean,
I don't either.
you're also correct that getting 15% of what you want or whatever
Mm-hmm.
is just that's maybe a good a low bar to set, but it's also a pragmatic one. Nothing ever really gets done in a large body of Congress. I think, frankly, I think they should raise the cap on the House, frankly. I think we'd get more representation and there'd probably be a lot less entrenched interests. But at the same time, a large body is always going to have so much deadlock. It's almost impossible to get things done. That's why I say I take the world for how it is. Government is always about compromise. As an idealist, you'd never want to compromise your beliefs, but it's not compromising what you believe in if you to acknowledge that you got to make deals in order to get stuff done. The problem is the deals always suck and they never make anybody happy. So it's just like, there's ways to compromise where someone gets a little bit of something, everybody gets something. Then there's ways to compromise where everybody gets screwed, and it's usually the latter. But
Right.
yeah, term limits,
I know you
absolutely
guys.
though.
Term limits. I would love that in an ideal world, right? But we've seen, even with some of the nominees, like Matt Gaetz, right? We've seen Republicans vote against even having that nomination, guys. So we still have a whole bunch of rhinos that are in there, and a whole bunch of, some people even on the left that are coming a little bit more to the side and independent, kind of with their thinking. But to get them all in agreement, even if we have a red Senate and a red Congress, right, a House, are they going to be able to vote these things through? And you guys have to understand they're voting against themselves. They want to be in power forever. They want to continue to run and be the next Nancy Pelosi that lives in there for 6, 7, whatever decades.
Sometimes,
So
sometimes they want to lose. It's crazy. Like again, the Republicans. What's the phrase? They're beautiful losers, right? Like I remember when Trump was in the first time in 2016. It's like
right,
he had a Republican Congress. They did nothing to advance his agenda. They actually stabbed him in the back repeatedly. It's like,
right,
bro, it's just like so. I mean, I think there's more of the America First brand, but again,
yes,
branding isn't necessarily voting records. So yeah, I'm hoping that this new Congress that comes in will actually promote his agenda. But
mm-hmm.
there's just
But it's
these
so needed.
just because Mitch McConnell though, like in the Senate, Mitch McConnell's stepping down. That don't mean he's leaving the Senate. That doesn't mean his voting record's going to change. These people are
Right,
snakes. It's a den of vipers. The Senate. It's
right.
the old boys club. And so it's just like
Mm-hmm.
just keep your
Exactly.
fingers crossed. We'll see what we can do.
Right. One thing I tell everyone too is, it's so easy to be in contact with your local congressman. I've met with mine, and maybe not like every single day, guys. So realistically, but I've met with mine like once a year. I send emails, good and bad. I mean, if you got a good congressman, tell him, keep up the fight, give them some encouragement, because I'm sure they're all hearing hate most of the time, right? But the ones that are actually doing what they say they're going to do, be like awesome, and make sure you're giving them that word of encouragement. But if you keep them on their toes and you help them accountable, say, hey, you promised this and this, and then I don't know, maybe because I have a podcast and things like that, you're like, so I can just show that. Don't send me a letter, because I'll broadcast that too. Don't send me a letter of like, you tried, I'm like, and here is my congressman's letter. So, but you guys still, they work for us, so make sure that you have that relationship with them. But whether they're going to help Trump, I mean, you got the Lindsey Grahams out there, you got the Mitch McConnells out there, and hopefully the new ones that are coming in really give him that support and be able to push these kind of things through, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure everything can be executive order to everyone. I'll
No,
just say it.
it would be. Here's the thing: like everybody wants the imperial presidency on one hand when they're facing
Right.
like the deadlock of Congress or something, but then on the other hand, there are also this is the beauty of the three branches of government, but at the same time. It's always about the pendulum. So I mean, you look at what the Bush administration did, how they pushed through the Patriot Act and stuff like that. It's like there's always consequences to having total control of the government, but
That's right.
I think it's funny. It's like the congressman thing. It's just like some people have really good congressmen. There are a few that I actually genuinely respect. Marjorie Taylor
Mm-hmm.
Greene and Louis Gohmert. They're the only congressmen who actually came into the gulag to check on our living conditions.
That's
Meanwhile,
right.
meanwhile, my own congressman Chris Smith from New Jersey, he's terrible. I worked with him in his office when I was doing the labor thing in Jersey. When I was the union rep for the contractors, I was constantly at battles with our management, on the Navy base because they were violating labor laws and specifically USERRA. USERRA protects National Guard and reservists who go on
Right.
military duty so that they can't get fired from work. And our employer was screwing with a lot of the veterans there. And Chris Smith, he's like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
he's the veteran guy. He loves veterans. So I'm working with his office. After J6, radio silence. Totally abandons the investigation I had into labor abuses. Totally threw me under the bus. And then he voted for that stupid committee that went after
Right.
Pelosi's committee against Trump for J6. Complete rhino. Just I
Right.
don't have good words. I'm not going to use any bad words, but it's just a
Right.
shame. It's just a shame.
Right.
You
The
know,
state I live in Virginia went blue. I mean, it's like seriously. I mean, we have a huge section that's red, and there's some congressmen and senators. Not our senator that went back to Tim Kaine, but it's like unbelievable. I was like, all the work I've done. Are you kidding me with that, people? But then you have people don't understand, or maybe you don't know that Washington D.C. is like 10 miles, guys. So where do they all live? And where they all go to Virginia, and you have this huge, or in Maryland. Right. And it seems like all the way down the east coast of it is very strongholds of blue and liberals, and that's just how it went. And I'm like, okay. I'm even worried because we have a governor's election coming up next year. Is that going to go that way?
hmm.
And that's a huge, huge difference. But
I
I know
actually
that you.
I actually
Go ahead.
support and, maybe I'm a radical because of the issue like they're constantly trying to get DC statehood for representation. here's the thing, like they could just partition Maryland, and they already returned land to Virginia. They should return the other half to Maryland, and then just keep the District of Columbia, just the federal buildings there, and that would give
That's
them
right.
representation. I mean, Maryland's blue as it is. It's not gonna. It's not like it's gonna
Yeah,
change
it
much of
is.
anything. So I mean, I think that would be a good solution, if you will, and it'll undercut. You know, the permanent population in DC is divided into two people: the poor who get ignored,
Hmm.
some of the wealthy who a lot of them work for the government. And this is just
Right.
as an aside. I'm sorry to let you get back to what you were saying before, but like when I was doing the voir dire hearings where they choose your
Mhm.
juries for my trial, every jury member, every prospective juror was a government employee. They worked for the Department of Justice as lawyers. They worked. Some of them worked for the offices of congressmen. Like there was someone from Chuck Schumer's office that was trying to get on the jury. These are people connected to all the three-letter agencies. It's like this is our jury. I just wanted to put that out there. It's just like DC is a
Right.
cesspool. They ignore the poor. Like the gap
Mhm.
between poor and rich is disgusting. There's no real middle class. And then at the top, at the end of the day, it's just like a breeding ground for. It's incestuous. That's what it is. It's an incestuous relationship between
Right.
DC and the federal government. And I don't know. I just chop it up, give it back to the states, and I think you'd clear up a lot of the corruption. But I apologize for interrupting. Please go
Oh
ahead.
no. No, because I mean, I love sitting here talking with you, but I'm like, there's many things that you're working on now too. I mean, I know that you're a J6er and stuff like that. I don't want to not mention that, and because part of the mission here too is there are still so many thousands, you guys, that are in the systems that are still suffering.
Hmm.
I remember even when I met Cynthia Hughes years back, like when this first started. I mean, I have a nationwide school, right? And I was like, I was thinking, like you mentioned, they came in and they horrified these families and the children and the whatever, and I was like, how do these kids go even to school, or with their parents being this and having this around them? I was like, if you have any families, we'll definitely give them scholarships on what we can do to help these families and these children, because I couldn't even imagine being like, my dad just got arrested, and they're going to get bullied and mortified with nonstop hatred, right?
Yeah.
um, so there's things that we can do and stuff, and I don't want to dismiss that at all. And I know that there are, like you said, you mentioned over 1,000, but there are more. And even today, more and more people are still, even with Trump coming, like you said, still getting arrested by this regime, and it is unbelievable. So, if you want to go over all of that, and how we can help, what your mission is, and I played your video that it was on the website, and I'll be putting that into the comments. I don't know about Rumble, guys. I don't know, if you guys can even still see me live right now, but Rumble is crashing, and hopefully it's not just for me. I've been told it's affected all day long,
I've heard
but
similar
maybe
things
they
today.
knew
Yeah.
we were going to talk about this today, right? I don't know, but
Yeah.
anyway.
Well, it's funny. It was early 2021 in the DC jail. For those that don't know, when the marshals pick you up, they bounce you around the country. They call it diesel therapy.
Mhm.
So like Con Air, that's a real thing. They put all the felons or the people they arrest. They put them on planes. They bounce them around the country. They moved me between two jails in Jersey. They sent me up to New York. Flew me to Oklahoma. Flew me to West Virginia. They drove me to Virginia, and then they finally drove me to DC. So after like a couple weeks, I finally ended up in the Gulag. That was February 3rd, and like I said, we were in solitary for some time, but eventually like we would start getting out and we would start interacting with each other. And so we started forming bonds. And again, I was a union rep. Not everybody's thing, I get it, but I felt a moral like obligation to bring a lot of these guys together. And so Cindy like would hear the stories I tell. I'd be like, hey, you should put money on this guy's books. They need commissary, this, that, and the other thing. And so she started like we put lists together of everybody's family members, and so they formed us basically a support group. It was just a support group. It was like kind of like this. They did Zoom calls every week. They talked about what they were going through. They showed support for each other. They did Bible studies and stuff like that. It was a support group, but eventually,
Yeah, I'm sure they needed it.
a lot absolutely. And keep in mind also like the way PFP evolved into more than a support group but an actual charity is that a lot of this is mostly women. There were fathers and stuff, but this was mostly women, like wives, or and so you had a lot of these guys locked up. They were the breadwinners of the family, and so you had a lot of women who were working two, three jobs to support their families, and you had kids forgetting what their fathers looked like, and you had it was just horrendous. Some women ended up selling their blood so that they could get money to pay their bills. It was egregious, and so eventually Patriot Freedom Project turned into more than just a support group. It was an actual charity, and so it became a 501c3. Dinesh D'Souza gave us one of the first
Yep.
donations. It was a mass. It was extremely generous. And so it's almost almost year four, and hopefully, we branched out. Hopefully, this will be the last Christmas because
Right.
we've helped with rents, paying bills, car payments, all this kinds of stuff, insurance, and all that. But then eventually, we branched out into legal support because the public defenders are garbage. I gotta say, like a lot of them,
Yes.
some people got okay results, but at the end of the day, like the public pretenders, they were friends with the prosecutors. They made
Hmm.
corrupt deals, and they sold their clients out. And some of them probably weren't even malicious. Some of them, like, they just genuinely didn't care enough. They weren't getting paid for it, or they didn't even. This was their first time experiencing something like this, and they had this normalcy bias, like, oh yeah, this is just how the system works. And then even at the end of it, they're like, oh, yeah, they, for whatever reason, they're not willing to work with us. So people got horrible plea deals, they got threatened, they got superseding indictments, and all this. So yeah, people needed real lawyers. Um,
Right.
didn't always work out for everybody, but it was better than surrendering for But I digress. Look, and I appreciate you letting me talk about this stuff because again, I say hopefully this is the last Christmas. We just had Thanksgiving. We helped a lot of families have Thanksgiving. Christmas.
Hmm.
I mean, this is again. Hopefully this is the last Christmas. But you got over, like I said, over 1,500 people who have been charged. Not everybody is at their worst right now, but you still have people getting arrested. You still have people who have family members in prison. You still have people who are preparing to be sentenced because they're not holding off on that. They're still sending people to
Right.
prison. People have their sentencing hearings coming up. People have they had trials starting this week. So it is what it is. Like, this isn't stopping until Trump gets in there and puts a halt to it. That's still over 40 days away. So
Right.
I want people to realize that it's not over yet. And this is on top of the fact that PFP is probably still going to be needed after Trump gets in. Because again, you Google anyone's name, I'm considered a neo-Nazi, far-right extremist, domestic terrorist scumbag. It's the only thing you'll look up. You're not going to see I served 12 years in the military. You're not going to see I was a comedian.
Right.
You're going to see that I'm a horrible
Hmm.
monster. These people's
Right.
reputations have been destroyed. A lot of these guys were self-made men. They lost their businesses because they couldn't work because they were behind bars. People have lost their homes. They couldn't pay their mortgages. So this was a humanitarian disaster. It's a humanitarian
Right.
disaster. And so, I just ask that if anybody's listening and they can contribute even a few dollars, go to patriotfreedomproject.com. And I'm just asking you to help. Hopefully, this will be the last Christmas, and none of these kids are going to have to go, without celebrating Christmas. And hopefully, again, this will be the last time. And when Trump gets in there, the fathers are going to be home, mothers are going to be home, families are going to be whole, and maybe in the future
Right.
there'll be restitution, and they won't have to pick up from they won't have to start from square one. Hopefully.
Right. And and thank you for all that. But I just also want to let everyone know this too. Just I call me Debbie Downer, but there's just that of, and you're speaking of over 1,000. Okay. And so if Trump's going to go in there and he's going to look case by case, it's not going to be something that's going to be done in the first day. So it's not even going to be over in this next 40 days. It's going to be something that hopefully is done within the next 3 to 4 months per se, but you're still looking at 3 to 4 months, if that, because we're talking over 1,000 and more. And if they're arresting people too, then now he's even got more that he's got to look at and go through each thing. And I'm sure he has a team, but I bet you Trump's going to really want to look at every single situation and go, okay, because he's got to do the signature of the pardon. He's got to have his crew and his DOJ and his FBI, whatever, go and stop this. And change doesn't happen immediately. We want it to, but look at all the people that are already infecting this whole situation. And so he's got to go in and he's got to get rid of all of that. He's got to replace all of that and then get this stuff to justice. And if he's going to do pardons, um, I don't see him doing 1,000 in one day. He's got to look at these individually. So I'm just putting a little bit more realism on the fact that these people are going to still be suffering for more than 40 days. It could be several months, but we're hoping that this does not go into another Christmas for sure. And they're going to need that. I mean, these children haven't been with their family members, right? And some of these prisoners haven't even seen their children born,
Yeah.
right? So it's just horrible, and they're living in situations they're not receiving the speedy trials that they're asking for. And like you said too, sometimes it's the same judge. Sometimes you might even get the same jury members, right? Because the pool is so limited.
Yeah.
And a public defender already has 100 cases already, and now you're going to throw this on to them. You think that, especially if they're tainted, you think that that's the one they're going to look at first? Like, oh, I'm going to get right on that. No,
It's
no,
some of them are so biased too, because my public defender, he seemed like a nice old man, but it was Zucker. I got very few. I never got to see him. They would bring like this phone into your cell when you were in solitary, and they'd give you a legal call. It lasted for like 5 minutes. They'd keep asking you over and over again, "Are you a Proud Boy? Are you an Oath Keeper?" I'm like, "What? I don't even know what that is." And then they just never they never did anything. But in particular, my guy, all he did was just talk on the phone about how much he hated Trump and what a piece of crap Trump is. And I'm just like, are you my lawyer? Like, are you gonna like get me out of here? Like, what are you doing? And so, yeah, I mean,
right?
the whole process has been tainted. So I always say this. I'm a pragmatist. We just had a large space about this on X last night. A lot of the
Nice.
J6 defendants, and you know, I say I take the pragmatic position, which is that we can talk about pardons, but my main concern is stopping the prosecutions on day one and
Yes.
opening the prisons and letting these people out. And so I'm sure you saw that interview he just did the other day, where he talked about, you know, again, him wanting to do pardons, a lot on day one. I think that a lot of people missed a lot of what he said too. He also said that he doesn't, you know, he wants to look at the cases like you just said, because there were Antifa there,
Mm-hmm.
there were suspicious people there. So he knows there was infiltration. I do think he's going to have a lot of good people helping him to kind of burn through a lot of these cases. And here's one thing too. I always make this point: when Trump gets in, he's going to have control of the Department of Justice. That means he's going to have control of the FBI. He's going to have control of the Department of Homeland Security. He's going to have
Mm-hmm.
control of the Department of Defense, which also means the Defense Intelligence Agency. He's going to have theoretically control of the CIA. If he gets control of these departments and agencies, I believe it is not improbable that he's going to get all the lists of confidential human sources and feds and assets that were there that day from those organizations. So if you get those lists and you just compare them to the list of defendants, I think he's going to be able to figure out pretty quickly who should get pardoned and who shouldn't. Um,
Right.
so
Nice.
I take a pragmatic approach. I know that there are people who don't deserve pardons. I don't distinguish between violent, nonviolent. A lot of people get caught in that trap. I think it should be between. I don't think it's violent versus nonviolent. I don't think it's who was on the grounds versus who was in the building. I don't think it's who got misdemeanors versus who got felonies, and I don't think it's who went to trial versus who took a plea deal. My dichotomy has always been who went there for the right reasons to support their president and the country, and who went there to entrap people. I think that there are more
Right.
people. I think there's more people in the second category than even J6ers want to admit. And so, you know, I understand the compulsion for a blanket pardon. It's clearly not going to happen. So I think that people need to realize that Trump's not stupid, and I think it's actually prudent. I think we can chew gum and walk at the same time. I think we can let people out of prison who've been there for 4 years, and not let them languish any further. But I also think we can review who the bad actors were. That way, we don't give people like Ray Epps or, you know, John Sullivan, people who were provocateurs or infiltrators. I don't think we need to give them a slap on the wrist, because they'll just do this again. You know, they'll
Right.
sabotage the next election. That's again, we talked about we talked before about you know, the common law system and how bad precedent can take generations to undo.
Mhm.
So I don't want to pardon the people who stage this and give them basically basically a blank check to do it again, because they will do it again.
Right.
You give feds an inch, they'll take a mile. So, you know,
Mhm.
that's just my position. A lot of people argue Blackstone's ratio. That's the principle from William Blackstone, who was the English jurist. They always say, "Oh, I would rather 10 guilty men go free than for one innocent man to rot in prison," and that's true. But that's a principle of due process. That's a principle of the courtroom. You know, that's when the question of guilt or innocence is up in the air. But if we have the lists of who the guilty people really were, that doesn't really
Right.
apply to me. So I think it's pragmatic to get the lists of these people, let everybody out, let them back with their families, and then in the meantime we'll sort out who the bad guys were, and then the bad guys, they're gonna have some explaining to do. That's what I think.
Right. Right. And I'm looking, I'm hoping for that too. I really am. And I don't know how soon he's going to be able to get this too, but I see that he's passionate because this has everything to do with the last election. And we know to this day, he was just on an interview too, still saying, I know this election was stolen.
Right.
I mean, so he's got a lot of passion when it comes to this. And then to watch people suffer because they came to support him during this matter, I'm absolutely, I see him really invested into fixing this and having, like you said, especially since he has control over these different departments. I know he's already invested in going, we've got to get better leadership in this because this is absolutely a shame. And he's faced this persecution, guys, from the actual speech that he gave and this so-called insurrection to the fact of getting raided and all these criminal charges, against him. He is very motivated to get that stuff straightened up and changed right away. So,
A lot of people don't realize too. Well, first off, you made an important observation, which is that they sabotaged the 2020 election, and then they weaponized that to sabotage the 2024 election. So,
mhm,
this is two times around here. I don't think he wants to keep putting up with this nonsense because so they used us. I always say my greatest regret from J6 isn't that I walked through a building; it's that I was used as a weapon against President Trump. We all were. They turned us into patsies. They sabotaged us. They sabotaged President Trump. They sabotaged two elections, and as a result, they sabotaged the country. The real bad actors have to be held accountable. But more than that, I want people to understand, just like I'd mentioned Dinesh D'Souza, I want to give credit where credit's due. President Trump is an extremely generous man. I saw you playing the videos earlier. President Trump has supported Patriot Freedom Project since 2021. J.D. Vance has also supported has supported Patriot Freedom Project, and so when you go to these events and you see how he interacts with the kids of these families, that I mean
right.
he's a grandfather himself. He's not a monster. He's actually an extremely human
Mhm.
person. He's extremely human, and a lot of people don't have the humility to admit that he's just a regular guy. He might be a billionaire, he might be the president, but he is an extremely humble servant of the
That's
people.
right.
And so I just want people to recognize that President Trump cares about these people. He actually it was funny. We were at a Bedminster event at one of his properties, the Bedminster property here in Jersey, and there was a defendant's wife, Sarah Radonovich. She made a painting of President Trump, and he signed it for auction. He signed her painting, and so
Nice.
this guy cares about the kids. He cares about the families, and he's told them repeatedly
Hmm.
that he's going to make them whole. We've
Right.
we've made it this long. Unfortunately, some people have taken their lives. But if anybody's listening,
Hmm.
I encourage you, just have a little hope, have a little patience. I know it's easy for me to say, but well, it's actually not. Like I lost 3 years of my life too. I want to encourage everybody to just relax. He's not in office yet. We still got over a month ahead of us, so we just got to have patience and hope for the best, and just keep
That's
watching
right.
the situation.
I'm glad that you are kind of finishing up on that word because yesterday on my Sunday reset, that was the theme of the show, having hope, everyone, and we've seen that from his rallies. That's why we all voted for him because he is a man of the people. He has shown absolute love and dedication to the nation and all of the citizens, no matter what side you're on. He is here to bring us this wonderful world, a nation that we once remembered, right? Safe borders and streets, the ability to have a justice system that actually serves correctly on both sides of the stream, to be able to have healthy, I'm glad he brings people on like healthy food, but to bring us hope that we are going to remember a nation that once was thriving and was beautiful. And, and he shows that rally after rally, interview after interview, his love that he has for all different kinds of people. And we are excited to see him come in and because there, like you said, there's been many J6ers that have even taken their own lives waiting for this nonsense. So um, Tim, I am thrilled that you came on. And by the way, FYI, my dad's retired Navy lieutenant commander, so I have a love for Navy. And thank you so much for your service. But give a shout out about where people can find you. I'm going to repost all these guys in the comments below in Rumble, I promise. I don't know what happened in that stream before, but I had to make a whole new one and I had all the stuff there already. So I will make sure that, and I've got JJ and Try in the chat, my mods and producers, they'll capture all this. And so just tell everyone where to find you and where to find the Patriot movement here so that we can follow you, share the stuff out, and do what we can to help.
Sure. If you want to follow me, trolling provocateurs and heads, if you want to follow me on social media, I do post a lot of the video as well that's been withheld. You can follow me on X. I'm Tim Hale, criminally funny J6er. That's my title, but my handle is Lewis of Monmouth, just like right here on the screen here.
Mhm.
Or Louis of Monmouth. Monmouth is the county I'm from in Jersey, so I like to sound like a snob. Um, and so, but also if you want to help the families and you want to be invested in the foundation that my family set up for the J6ers, you can go to patriotfreedomproject.com. And again, hopefully this is the last Christmas these families will have to go without their loved ones, but it is still here. It's a few weeks away, so anything you could give to help these families, it will make a difference. And I appreciate you so much for having me on to talk about this. It's a
Oh,
humanitarian disaster. So
yes, it is. It's honestly my pleasure because even, we got to get the word out, and we got to, if we can do a part, I know I have a bunch of great viewers that love to do this and they can share this out. And you guys do a wonderful job in helping me, right? But it's important because we can't let things like this just go away or forget about it. And if you guys can do anything you can to help these children have a wonderful Merry Christmas, I appreciate that. My beautiful viewers, thank you so much. And please give Tim a follow. It's another thing, you guys. It's free to share this stuff out. We're all on social media, and the more noise we make, the less it's hard to, or it's harder to ignore.
yeah,
That's right, harder to ignore. Bring awareness. So, let me know. And we're following each other now, so I will do my part as well. And if you ever need to come back, just reach out to me, and we will make that happen, my friend. And
absolutely.
again, one last thing, thank you for your service. I really appreciate it, and I hope you have a beautiful and blessed Christmas.
And you as well. Thank you again for having me on. I hope you have a great holiday, and good luck with the show. Thank you again for
Thank you.
having me on. I appreciate you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Wasn't that awesome, guys? I'm so excited to be able to do this.